Hello, and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today, I'll be showing you how to cycle from Covent Garden in central London to Finsbury Park in North London. This ride takes around 30 minutes, and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, this is an incredibly quick journey, but going by bike is still a competitive option and only 10 minutes longer. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a big thank you to everybody who supports the channel on Patreon. If you're feeling generous and you'd like to contribute too, then you can find a link in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting by the entrance to Covent Garden tube station on Long Acre, and we're going to head up Neal Street. Neal Street is largely pedestrianised, and this route is a nice quiet way out of Covent Garden and onto a cycle route which I use to get up to King's Cross. In previous videos I've used Bow Street and Endell Street, which runs parallel to this, but this is a lot quieter and has far fewer cars. Although during busy shopping periods there might be quite a few pedestrians in the road, so you could consider using Bow Street during those times. This video was shot in the late morning rush hour on a work day. When we do finally join Endell Street, as we've done here, it's on the much quieter northern section of it, which is part of the London Borough of Camden, which doesn't really have any through traffic on it compared to the southern section. We then use these traffic lights and turn right, joining the protected stepped cycle tracks on Shaftesbury Avenue, Bloomsbury Street and Gower Street, which continue here north-south through Bloomsbury. In this video I'm going to be showing off the new Cycleway 50, which runs from Camden to Finsbury Park. I've already shown the southbound version of that route in another video, but it actually runs on different streets northbound, so do stay tuned to see how it works, as it is quite a bit different. If you've seen the first part of this route up to Camden before, do still keep watching, as there have actually been a couple of changes to the cycle lanes around Torrington Place. I think they're good changes as well, and I'll point them out in a minute when we get there. The step cycle lanes that we're using on Gower Street now are pretty good, but they do have a few downsides. You do need to watch out at junctions to make sure that traffic isn't trying to turn across you. You do have priority, but not all drivers respect it. And as that green van ahead was actually demonstrating, there are actually some loading bays in the cycle lane which can sometimes block it. That's definitely a big design flaw, and I really hope that those bays could be sometime relocated to side streets, as it's really not great when you do run into a parked van. Fortunately, we didn't on this occasion. Now, as we continue along here, you'll see the upgraded cycle lanes that I was talking about. The street's been resurfaced and is now beautifully smooth, and there are also these new concrete curb lines protecting us from the main road, which I think are a huge improvement on the treatment here before. I'd love to see these concrete curbs used in more cycle lanes. They are much more solid than the kind of plastic ones that you often see around London, and they've also got, if you look closely, a chamfered angled edge, also called a forgiving curb, and the point of that is to allow you to use more of the width of the lane, which is just making for a more comfortable ride, but especially if you need to overtake anybody, as you might often do on this street, as it is very busy at certain times of day. We don't continue down Tavistock Place. I actually like to turn off Marchmont Street and then turn into Lee Street, as the corner onto Judd Street, which we're about to make, is just a lot easier, and also you don't have to wait at the traffic lights, which you would do if you just kept going straight. Judd Street is named after Sir Andrew Judd, who developed the street in the 1570s through the Royal Company of Skinners. His main family estate was actually in Kent, And the other street names around this area also have a nod to that. So Lee Street, Bidborough Street and Mabledon Street are all references to places in Kent near the estate. For our purposes, riding it on a bike, it's a great way to get through here because it's closed at one end to cars. So it's a nice ride and it puts you neatly onto Midland Road, which has these protected cycle tracks down it. Midland Road is of course named after the Midland Railway Company, which built St Pancras Station for its services to the Midlands, which it still serves to this day, in addition to places further afield like Paris, Brussels, Rotterdam and Amsterdam. These cycle lanes are great, but we could always do with a bit more of an upgrade. If you remember those lovely curbs that we saw on Tavistock Place earlier, well, why don't we put one of those along here where there's no protection at the junction? It would fit nicely and it would make passing through the junction a lot more protected than the current painted lane. Now, there are a couple of ways that you can tackle the junction with Royal College Street coming up ahead. You could just continue straight on these protected lanes and turn right into Royal College Street, but I actually like to turn left here into Goldington Crescent, which is a street that's closed to cars at one end, so never really has any traffic on it. And then at the end of Goldington Crescent, we can use the signalled cycle crossing to get over the main road, and that drops us directly into Royal College Street, as you can see here, working nicely. That does work in both directions, and I try not to make things too complicated when it comes to routes, but actually if you're going in the opposite direction towards King's Cross, then the optimal way is probably to stay on the main road and not use the crossing. But just do whatever you like, both ways of doing it are completely fine. Now, Royal College Street has its own protected cycle lanes on it, which have been progressively upgraded in the years that it has been here. One thing that you might notice at the moment is that this street is actually closed to traffic. This isn't a long-term thing, it was just something that was happening because of, I think, Thames Waterworks when I came up here. And you can see this closure, but one thing that is nice to see is that cycling access has been maintained even though the cycle lane was being dug up. So a diversion was put there for cycles and we were able to get through it no problem. That's actually great, and it is not something that happens very frequently across London, but it is increasingly something that I'm noticing in Camden. So big shout out to Camden officers and policymakers who I think are behind that and issuing permits for works with that in mind. So I wish more boroughs would follow that approach. We've now turned on to Cycleway 50, and we were able to do that because there was a dropped curb leading onto these lanes on Randolph Street. You do briefly have to cycle on Agar Grove here without a protected lane, but in this direction it doesn't actually matter too much because the lights only let you out when there's no traffic on there anyway, and in the opposite direction you do have a protected lane, so it's actually not too much of a problem. That then puts us on to Stratford Villas and Camden Square, where we are now, where we're cycling on the main carriageway, but because of point closures like this one, this isn't used as a through route for cars and is very quiet. I should point out though that it is a bit hilly around here, and this is one of those hills, so it is a little bit of a slog to go up in this direction, although it is very fun to go down in the opposite direction. It's not an insane hill, but you'll definitely notice it. Do note the green and blue cycleway signs as well as the markings on the floor to direct you the right way. By the way, do take note of the architecture around here. I do think that these huge, really tall Victorian villas are really cool in such a dramatic, steep setting. Another strange architectural feature is that church tower on the right. You might think it's of an even weirder design than it is because those are actually mobile phone masts that are festooning the top of the tower. Though you might be surprised to learn that that building is not actually a church anymore, it's actually flats and a recording studio of all things. Now, I had a bit of an issue with the next crossing over York Way when I came down here. It's one of those ones that's activated by motion detector. You can see the box there, and you might notice that I shifted to the right there after the cut. That's because I was waiting there for about 5 minutes on the left curb and it didn't change. until I repositioned myself to the right and it actually detected me. In the short term, I guess it could be recalibrated, but frankly in the long term, I don't think that those motion detectors should be used without a push button override to let the system know that you're waiting there, as it is a little bit annoying, and that's quite a frequent problem that you see at crossings that are done with motion detector all over London. In reality, I think that most people riding bikes through there probably wouldn't have been as patient as me and probably would have just crossed the empty road when it was red, which obviously isn't ideal and isn't how we want people to act when they're riding bikes. This next crossing here, you always have priority over because it's a zebra, but of course don't forget that not all motorists do stop for those, so you do need to be careful and make sure that cars are coming to a halt as you cross there. This part of the route is of course running on the main carriageway of the road without any cycle lanes, but the way that the streets are laid out around here means that there isn't really any through traffic on them. We're running parallel to Camden Road and it works quite nicely. We are about to get back onto protected lanes here though, so it starts off with this section of Caledonian Road which is two-way, but then Cycleway 50 actually splits into two, so if you're doing this southbound, you'd be coming down Tollington Road, which is to the right there. You can see the wand cycle lane there, but we're actually going northbound. So we're going to use this Toucan crossing to go into Walters Road. And then at the end of Walters Road, we turn right onto Parkhurst Road, which does have a cycle lane on it. That very quickly turns into Seven Sisters Road. Now, I had a bit of a rant about this in the previous video showing the southbound route, and I have to say I really don't like it when routes are split like this on different roads in different directions. I think it's really confusing and it has a number of drawbacks, for example, people making local trips. Another weird thing about this cycle lane is that it's actually on the right hand side of the general traffic lane, which I think is pretty unusual for a one-way cycle lane, and you can see that this guy just cuts right across us. The other thing that you immediately notice on the Seven Sisters Road lane is that a lot of people are already using it as a two-way cycle lane. So we already passed one delivery rider going in the opposite direction, and there's another guy just coming up here who does the same thing. I think there might even be more further down the street. I certainly saw more when I was out. Now, you could say, oh well, great, people can already use it as a two-way cycle track, but no, that's not true, because the lights and the signals and the junctions are only set up to be safe in one direction. These guys cycling in the opposite direction are just going with no traffic lights, which is an incredibly dangerous setup to have, frankly, especially when it's happening so frequently. So yeah, while this cycle lane is a game changer for us, it's a really nice protected way to get up from Camden to Finsbury Park, and we're making really good use of it today. From a overall cycle network perspective, no, this needs to be converted into a two-way cycle track, and you can see that there is definitely space to do that. This is actually a trial scheme done with temporary materials and experimental traffic orders, so when the permanent scheme is put in place, I think that that should be the plan. Turn the Seven Sisters route into a two-way cycle lane. It's already been used as such by a lot of people you saw there, even in that short time we were using it, but it's not safe for them to actually do that, and there isn't really a way to stop them. But anyway, it does really improve the long distance route if you use it properly like we did. And yeah, that was generally a great ride all the way up from Covent Garden to Finsbury Park, although would be great if that lane could be extended further up to meet other routes at Finsbury Park itself. We didn't quite get to the park. If you want to download the full map of the route, then you can find a link in the description below the video. And if you want to support the channel on Patreon, there's also a link to the Patreon down there as well. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, do just make sure you hit subscribe on YouTube. That is free. It just alerts you for when new videos are posted. And please do leave a like, as it helps other people find the video. I'll see you guys in the comments. Do let me know what you think, especially about that Seven Sisters lane. Do you think it would be better as a two-way? Have I misjudged it? Just let me know. And a quick housekeeping note that over the next few weeks, I have quite a lot of travel for both work and holiday planned, so I might not be able to get videos out every week. I'm going to try for a couple of weeks, but I think it's very likely that there'll be at least 1 or 2 gaps. So yeah, maybe see you in a few weeks, maybe see you next week, but either way, see you in the comments below. Goodbye.